Welcome back to another installment of me, Elon Musk, if my comment section is to be believed, using progressively more obscure and ridiculous ways to beat The Witcher 3. This time, using only Quen to deal damage. The rules are obvious, we can only use Quen to deal damage. So buckle up and put on your vests as we fly through the game and blow up the Wild Hunt. Our journey started with our humble beginnings in White Orchard, and by humble beginnings, I of course mean that we didn't actually have a way to deal damage yet. But that was okay, since not much happens here. All we have to do is talk to the locals, which is a bit difficult as an introvert, and kill a griffin for the Novigrad captain. This didn't end up being a problem, since Vesemir was more than happy to do the work for us while I kicked my feet up, used my Quen, and waited for the griffin to die. With this quick intro to the game out of the way, we could use the information the captain gave us and prepare to leave White Orchard to search for our raven-haired partner. First up though was letting Vesemir tickle the locals with his sword and signs, but we were eventually able to move on to our date, which unfortunately ended up with us being ambushed like I was a healthcare CEO, and then worst of all, we got third wheeled by the Emperor. He tasked us with finding the Witcher 4 protagonist and sent us on our way. Now this is where things get a little bit weird for a while, so quick warning, the plot for the next portion of this video is going to make about as much sense and be as coherent as a dementia patient on LSD, mostly thanks to us not actually being able to deal damage with Quen yet. Instead of travelling to Velen like normal, I decided to head back to White Orchard for a bit. Ciri can wait for a while, I'm not in any rush despite what the story might suggest. We needed some skill points, and there was only one way that came to mind.
Place of power, it's gotta be.
So after running around avoiding everything except large growing rocks in the ground, I had enough points to unlock Exploding Shield and Active Shield. I of course instantly took our newfound damage to the test against a group of dogs, and well, the numbers I was seeing on my screen was depressing to say the least. Sadly though, this was all the place of powers I had access to at this point, so for the time being I had to make do with dealing slightly more than 0 damage, but in an even more inconvenient way. But at least I was able to do something now, and get back to the story. For the time being, I decided to go spend time with my second wife, Triss. Her house was being looted faster than a shop in a riot, and the people were kind enough to tell me to seek out the King of Beggars. Here I thought I would use 100% of my brain and just go straight to his hideout without following the instructions of the quest. Turns out, this doesn't work, and the guard at the door just politely tells you to fuck off. So, I had no choice but to take after every philanthropy YouTuber and harass the homeless population for my own gain. After some harmless exploitation, I was able to return to the Putrid Grove and leech off of Triss for a bit. We went to collect her package with a slight detour through a sketchy basement with Asmongold blocking the way. Thankfully, I didn't have to fight for the most part since Triss was able to do most of the work. Once she got the Drowner low and failed to execute him, I was able to swoop in with the tech I learned in the bedroom, finishing prematurely and exploding all over the place. By that I of course mean that for the Exploding Shield to deal damage, it requires Quen to break, and it just so happens that casting and cancelling the alternative sign version of Quen is considered breaking, dealing an AoE shockwave of damage and even has the added benefit of not draining my stamina. So after exploding for a whole minute straight on the body on the floor, we could move on to the next part, helping Triss with some witch hunters. With our newfound strategy of trapping them in a corner one at a time and spamming the same move over and over again like it was a fighting game, I was able to easily take them down, even if it did take a while. With Triss taken care of, I wasted no time issuing an eviction notice to a local godling, before changing my mind and letting them stay. At this point I had just enough money to go to Skellige, which was perfect because I needed the skill points, and a new location means new places of power. We arrived on shore after a shipwreck with no injuries somehow, watched a guy get burned, and abandoned Yennefer before the wake to go mountain climbing and admiring the scenery. Karma followed suit though, and instantly killed me while snowboarding. But we pushed onwards to get our skill points, meanwhile Roach made the mistake of thinking I was playing Skyrim and did a bunch of goofy shit. This was just enough for me to unlock Quen Discharge, reflecting damage absorbed by our shield back to the attacker. And to be honest, this is kind of where the challenge ends. Once you unlock Quen Discharge, the game becomes basically a normal playthrough. Well, normal by my standards anyway. I made my way back to Velen to search for traces of Ciri, where, after admiring my massive damage numbers relative to my usual playthroughs, I immediately broke the game and ended up somehow trapping a dog in a house, soft locking the game, since I can't talk to the survivor if the dog is still alive, and for some reason, I can't investigate Hendrik's corpse before getting exposition dropped on me. But after a few minutes of flashbacks, I was eventually able to loot the corpse and enter the basement to look for clues. This led us to the Baron, where I was able to take a break from using Quen and could just slash through some wolves for a bit as Ciri when the Baron tells us what happened to her, or at least some of what happened to her. Before we could get the rest of the info, we had to investigate his family's disappearance. It looked like his wife either got into a fight or attempted to make a glory hole. This led us to the Pellar somehow, since he was able to help us track the Baron's family. Bad news was at the Pellar's door though, where the Baron's henchman, despite me having a shield that blocks all damage, managed to kill me embarrassingly effortlessly. Reloading my save, I was able to get what I needed and move on. That being more dialogue. Turns out, the Baron had a fetus, so I surprised him with a trip to Planned Parenthood. But first was of course lighting him on fire since Quen doesn't work in this fistfight. It's at this point I'd like to retract my statement about having good damage, since clearly that was a fucking lie, and I was back to doing barely double-digit damage to these wraiths. It took a while, but I was able to get the Baron to bury the botchling and turn it into a fancy GPS system. Geralt cosplayed as a tumbleweed for a bit as I rolled down the road before arriving at a family's house to interrogate them about the Baron's wife and daughter. They reluctantly shared some information and I made my way to Oxenfurt. As it happens, his daughter wasn't exactly receptive about the idea of returning to an abusive household and told me to piss off. I was used to being rejected by women though, so this was nothing new for me. We passed this sentiment on to the angry alcoholic man of Velen and somehow resisted the crippling urge to play Gwent. Next I had to work on finding his wife. This of course led me to Keira Metz, since she conveniently had a little bit of info about Ciri. This led us both into a cave in the middle of nowhere where the Wild Hunt also happened to be. Working our way through the cave was pretty trivial. The golem protecting the path didn't stand a chance against us, and I made my way further into the ruins. This was where things got a bit tedious. No matter how many times I do this section, I always manage to fuck up the timing of placing Yrden on these portals. It took a couple of tries, but eventually we were nearly at the end of the ruins. All that stood between us was Nithral, and he turned out to be quite a pain in the ass to deal with. He himself was fine, but the hounds he spawned proved to be a challenge. I was only really dealing damage when I got hit, the problem being that the hounds stop attacking when they get low for a bit so they can heal. I was left with no other option but to follow the advice of an alpha male podcast, single them out from their group and make my move. This worked extremely well. Exploding myself over and over again like a depressed person in a grenade factory was surprisingly effective. The Quen explosion staggered the hounds and prevented them from being able to heal. However, as tends to be the thing on this channel, things aren't allowed to go smoothly, and CD Projekt Red knows this. As such, Nithral thought he was at a Black Lives Matter protest and refused to stop taking a knee, soft-locking the game. I did try to work around it and humped the stairs for a few minutes seeing if I could climb to the area after the fight, but this didn't work, so it was back to the beginning of the encounter. Of course, Nithral was very persistent in his protests and soft-locked again. The third time's the charm though, and I was able to watch Keira deal with him. After this shit show went down, I got the info about the witches I needed and slept with Keira because I wanted her to be at Kaer Morhen later. Don't worry, I used protection to keep in theme with this run. Next up, just like Dr. Disrespect, some Mr. Beast employees, most Minecraft YouTubers, P. Diddy. You know what, this joke could go on for an hour at this rate, but anyway, just like them I couldn't help myself but talk to these kids. Thankfully, I managed to avoid Chris Hansen and learned about Johnny, who would be able to convince Gran, the Baron's wife, to take me to the Ladies of the Wood who Ciri got into beef with. He lost his voice though, which wasn't a problem because apparently Geralt is a licensed speech therapist in his spare time. On our way back to the village with Johnny's voice recovered, I let some drowners and hags slap me around a bit. This granted me access to a Zoom call with the Ladies of the Wood, but to get to meet them in person I had to do a task for them, killing a tree and playing an extreme version of I've Got Your Nose but with some guy's ear instead. After finishing these household chores, I got to meet the ladies in person, and I must say, they looked absolutely nothing like their Tinder profile pictures. They regaled us of the time they tried to eat Ciri, and I mean I don't blame them, I'd also like to eat Ciri, but I don't think they quite meant it the same way. I returned with what I knew to the Baron and let him know his wife had really let herself go. This understandably upset him, but he kept up his promise and told me the rest of what he knew about Ciri. She left the area, and I did the same back to Novigrad again. When arriving in Novigrad, I went to take a nap and had a dream of Dandelion and a bird, which was enough to tell me to go to the brothel he inherited called the Rosemary and Thyme. On the way, I ended up getting into a fist fight with some random drunk guy, so I of course had to reload my save. Choosing a different dialogue option next time around, I was able to avoid the confrontation and get to the brothel. Our 5'11" friend met us there, and we could give a good beatdown to some vagrants. One issue though, I couldn't use Quen here, so I had to wait around and let Exodyr do the work. Or at least that's what I thought. While yes, trying to use Quen here causes the game to tell you that it's disabled, going just slightly up the stairs in the corner was enough to be able to use it again. With the squatters removed, we raided the shelves and found Dandelion's contact list. Going down the list wasn't a problem at all, mostly just talking to people and of course losing to Rosa again, making the score between us 2-2 at this point. All sources led nowhere, so we regrouped with Zoltan and went to watch some local entertainment at the Kingfisher Inn. I got accused of murder, which is bold given that my only source of damage is quite literally self-defense, but the bard pulled us away and out of trouble, which was greatly appreciated. She was a friend of Dandelion and would help us find him, but again all our leads hit a wall and I had to follow a new trail of breadcrumbs left by Dijkstra. We took a bath together and were rudely interrupted by a group of men, which was completely unforgivable. As punishment, I bullied one of them in a corner while Dijkstra and co dealt with the rest. With the goons cleaned up, I went on to hunt for Junior. Initially, I tried to take the peaceful route through the casino, starting with some Jedi mind tricks on the guards outside, and when inside, playing some Gwent with the locals. Unfortunately, this casino mimicked those in real life. I was winning, so the owners came to put an end to me. The entire building turned on me, so I just hid behind the bar casting Quen, watching the guards play Russian roulette with a bullet in all 6 chambers. Junior wasn't here, so I made my way to the arena, which went equally as calmly since apparently 6 thugs are incapable of figuring out how a chair works. Again though, Junior was nowhere to be found. We did learn that he was working for the Redanians though, so I snitched on him to Dijkstra. Coincidentally, our close friend Vernon Roach had connections to the Redanians, so, like the good friend we were going to contact him purely because we needed something from him. He kindly obliged and took us to watch Radovid play versus his friend in chess. He told us where Junior was hiding, and I could go on my merry way to slaughter a whole bunch of goons using methods inspired by depression, self-harm. We found Junior and got to giving him a beatdown for what he did to Ciri, featuring foot fetish fan service in the background for the sickos that are into that sort of thing. Before he met his demise, he told us about a guy named Dudu last speaking to Ciri, so it was time to pull him out of hiding. We did this by putting on a play with Priscilla, the bard we met earlier. I didn't win any Oscars for my performance, only the hatred of the audience. But that didn't matter since Dudu was now with us and we needed him to free Dandelion from prison. This was a super easy task since we hit like a truck, defeating the witch hunter in seconds. We ungagged Dandelion and that was Novigrad done with. Time to move back to Skellige since we still had the wake to attend, which, given that we abandoned it before completing all of Velen and Novigrad, I'm baffled that it is still ongoing. Since it took me so long to arrive, one of the guests at the wake challenged me to a race. She probably thought it would be an easy win. Joke's on her though, I'm a professional racist, and absolutely crushed her. Afterwards, I snuck off to the side with Yennefer to sneak around and steal some things. The golem defending the area just like before didn't stand a chance and we made our escape. The mask that we had just stolen was to be used at the aftermath of a magic explosion that gives me and my Quen an inferiority complex. But honestly, outside of desecrating the local wildlife and pissing off more locals than a kick streamer in Asia, there wasn't really anything to talk about, so let's skip ahead a bit. We heard about Ciri being on a beach with one hell of an ugly creature. This was the same creature we stumbled across earlier in Velen, so after performing a quick kidnapping, it was time to fix him. Riding into Kaer Morhen, Yennefer was being a massive bitch, rearranging the entire place and destroying my bed. Since I don't really want to piss her off any more than she already is, I got to work helping Eskel hunting a forktail and Lambert going sightseeing, both of which weren't particularly engaging. The forktail died fairly quickly, and Lambert's section was just killing a few drowners and having a diplomatic session with the Troll United Nations. With these short tasks out of the way, everything was in place ready for the Witcher Bros to get shit-faced, dress up as Yennefer, and to pump Uma full of more chemicals than a celebrity on a Saturday night. As a token of his gratitude, he gifted us with HD footage of the Witcher 4 trailer. This took us to the Isle of Mists. An unconscious Ciri was in a hut surrounded by a group of dwarves, and they absolutely refused to let me in unless I found their friends. One went bungee jumping without a rope, another fell asleep every 3 seconds, and the last was a corpse in surprisingly pristine condition for a guy that was murdered by a fiend. The dwarves let us into their fortress, we met Ciri, and our boat was stolen. It wasn't a problem though, Ciri just teleported us out of there and back to Kaer Morhen. It was time to face the wild hunt by performing a pirouette. It wasn't long before we had to retreat though, and regroup with our squad. This is where things got annoying. Because we were on death march, the higher level hounds of the wild hunt just refused to die. My strategy of spamming Quen just wasn't cutting it, so I resorted to my next idea of sitting around waiting and hoping that the crew I had gathered early was capable of doing enough damage to take care of the situation for me. This worked out and we retreated with a fantastic cutscene of Eskel and Ciri fighting Caranthea with an unnecessary amount of slow-mo effects, which seemed shoehorned in by a developer who recently discovered that it was possible. Our efforts were all for nothing though, as Vesemir died. Maybe he should have considered using Quen and he might have survived. After a very brief period of mourning, Ciri invited us to attend a local frat party. Despite the initial hostility from the partygoers, we were let through to climb up Bald Mountain. Ciri quickly dispatched the crones and I made my way to fight Imlerith. Compared to how this fight usually goes for me, this was a breeze. Even though I got hit without Quen countless times, it didn't matter since having a shield that heals you and deals damage is kind of crazy. His health bar kept getting lower and lower before eventually we were able to finish him off by giving him the JFK haircut. Ciri and I relaxed a bit before returning to Novigrad, and it was time for final preparations. The first thing we did was stumble upon Avalak's pawn collection, and immediately followed him into a sketchy basement where we played Portal 2 to pass the time for a bit. We vaguely intimidated one of Eridan's men and moved on to Ciri. She wanted to steal some horses, so in order to be a good parent in the eyes of the game, I encouraged this behaviour. The guard here got met with the "why you hitting yourself" classic, and me and Ciri parted ways. Yennefer's section was equally a speedrun on account of the fact that our damage was reaching quadruple digits now, something completely unheard of for me. We freed the captive witches from the witch hunters, and we had one person left to help out, Triss. This was actually the part of the playthrough I was looking forward to the most. Triss led me to Dijkstra's bathhouse where Philip was throwing a tantrum and tearing the place up. We followed her through the sewer system and she summoned a golem. I was looking forward to this fight. I walked up to him, popped my Quen, and... nothing happened. Well, this did not go to plan at all. What was supposed to happen was his health bar was supposed to disappear faster than the hot singles in my area after I installed Adblock. But that is not what happened. For reference, here is a clip from user did.slip on Reddit of them pulling this off. They said in the comments it was from the fire aura of the golem with alt sign Quen reflecting damage, but I could not seem to get this to work. Maybe Yerden had something to do with it since that's also used in the clip, but I have no clue. I've linked this clip by the way in the description below for anybody interested in digging into this deeper. So, instead I had to do things the old-fashioned way, slowly chipping away at his health until I could pin Philippa to the floor and recruit her to our cause. With all the pieces in place, I sailed to Skellige for one last time. We did some negotiations and searched for the Sunstone to summon Eridan. Annoyingly, the cave was guarded by a siren that insisted on staying airborne and not really attacking me. I managed to get slightly lucky though and knocked it to the ground, which was all I needed to keep it trapped on the floor with the constant Quen explosions. With the siren defeated and the Sunstone in our possession, it was time to face the wild hunt. Ciri summoned Eridan and it was showtime. I blitzed past the fodder enemies and rushed straight to Caranthea and blasted him down. We switched back to Geralt, and this is where everything came crumbling down. Sadly, our Quen spam was doing 0 damage. I could permastun him into a corner, but that did nothing. I tried lowering the difficulty to see if that had any impact, but again, nothing. And to top it all off, because Caranthea only casts spells when fighting him as Geralt, these don't trigger the reflected damage portion of Quen. Hope was not entirely lost though. I did a bit of browsing on Google and came across this Reddit post from a guy with the legendary username Identified Rice. They managed to break Caranthea such that he was doing his series segment attack pattern, which was teleporting around and swinging his staff. But, despite my best efforts, I couldn't find a way to recreate this. This post was from 7 years ago, so it was kind of to be expected, but alas, I admitted defeat, pulled out my shiny sword for the first time this run and took out my frustration on Karanthea. He teleported me underwater and I was ready to face Eredin. This fight was easy, although somewhat ironically the fact that he doesn't do much damage meant that it took forever for him to die. I was at practically no threat of dying and could semi-AFK the first phase, spamming Quen and waiting for him to go into phase 2. Phase 2 was where things sped up a lot. His attacks could damage himself, so he was finished off in no time. We made our way up the mountain, confronted Avalak, Ciri went to Canada, and with that, I did not beat The Witcher 3 with only Quen. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to do the YouTube things like dislike, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And if you have a challenge idea you want to see me tackle next, let me know in the comments below. Take care and see you next time.